A connection beyond words. I lingered at my desk longer than necessary that evening, surrounded by the gentle whir of ventilation and the rhythmic tapping of keys. The building had emptied, leaving behind a peculiar stillness that seemed to pulse with unspoken possibility. My phone lit up with a text from David, my manager. "Could you stop by before heading out?" These requests were usually routine, minor clarifications, or tomorrow's agenda items. Yet something in those words sent a flutter through my chest. I nearly typed back, asking if morning would work, but curiosity drew me forward instead. David's workspace sat tucked in the building's corner, a modest room perpetually scented with espresso and sandalwood. Venetian blinds filtered the fading daylight into golden bands across his wooden desk. When I appeared in the doorway, he glanced up with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, though his eyes held an unusual warmth that shifted the atmosphere between us. "Appreciate you coming," he said quietly, motioning toward the chair facing him. He remained standing. I settled on the seat's edge, pulse quickening slightly. A lengthy pause followed, one of those meaningful silences where thoughts race faster than words. For perhaps the first time, my mind wasn't occupied with project timelines or performance metrics. I was thinking about him as a person. "There's something I've wanted to say," he began, leaning back thoughtfully. "It has nothing to do with projects or deadlines." My breath caught, equal parts intrigue and careful hope. Throughout our years working together, David had always been cordial, accessible, genuinely kind, but this moment felt fundamentally different. Something invisible yet powerful hung between us, substantial enough to grasp yet fragile enough to dissolve with one wrong move. I nodded, barely managing a whisper. "I'm here." He seemed to consider each word before speaking. "I've watched how dedicated you are, how much you genuinely care about excellence and about people. I wanted you to understand that I see all of it. You're exceptional, and I don't express that casually." The directness of his attention, the authenticity resonating in his voice, caught me completely unprepared. Warmth bloomed outward from my core, loosening the perpetual tension I'd been carrying. "Thank you," I managed, my voice unexpectedly unsteady. "That truly matters to me." Then something remarkable happened. He smiled, not the courteous expression reserved for conference rooms, but something authentic and unguarded that made the space between us feel electrified. That brief, quiet exchange contained multitudes of unspoken understanding, and I recognized that my evening wouldn't simply be about returning home. Something fundamental had transformed in the subtle architecture of our relationship, and my thoughts kept circling back to it. Walking down the corridor afterward, everything seemed altered, softer somehow, humming with an anticipation entirely separate from professional concerns. Driving home that night, I couldn't dismiss the sensation that my life had just veered from its expected trajectory. Deep within, I understood things would never quite return to what they were before. Sleep eluded me completely. The office lighting, David's words, the depth in his eyes, everything replayed endlessly, like a seam I couldn't pause. I kept reasoning it was merely appreciation, that I was reading too much into simple kindness, but something about how he'd looked at me, as though perceiving layers beneath the surface, sent my imagination wandering far beyond spreadsheets and quarterly reviews. Morning found me arriving unusually early, coffee in hand, hoping familiar routines would restore my equilibrium. The moment I entered, though, I sensed that subtle shift again, that trace of expectation hanging in the air like early mist. David stood at the window, hands clasped behind him, gazing across the urban landscape. Sunlight caught his features in a way that softened everything about him, made him appear more reflective, more approachable. "Good morning," I offered, steadying my voice. He turned, offering that small smile again. Morning. Another pause, just long enough to heighten my awareness of how our orbits had been drawing closer since that previous evening. We proceeded through our usual rhythm: correspondence, conferences, client discussions, yet underneath everything, that quiet electricity persisted. Every glance, every casual remark carried extra weight, and I found myself noticing details I'd overlooked before. By mid-afternoon, distraction had nearly overwhelmed me. That's when he requested my presence in his office again. My heart jumped. This time, the blind stood fully open, sunlight flooding the space and reflecting off polished surfaces. Rather than feeling exposed, though, the brightness felt welcoming, almost protective. "I wanted to continue our conversation," he said, this time leaning against his desk casually, arms folded. "About yesterday evening." I swallowed hard, trying to slow my racing pulse. "About what you said?" I asked, uncertain whether to laugh nervously or simply exist in the tension. "Not only that," he replied gently, shaking his head. "I meant every word, but there's something more. I believe there's a connection forming between us that transcends our professional relationship." The statement floated between us, simultaneously delicate and weighty, like crystal balanced on a table's edge. My thoughts spun with caution, curiosity, and an unexpected thrill. I'd never imagined a workplace could feel this way, where professionalism and emotional honesty could coexist so tangibly. "I sense it as well," I admitted, before doubt could intervene. The words surprised me, not just because I spoke them aloud, but because they rang absolutely true. A quiet understanding was developing between us, subtle and unspoken, yet impossible to deny. Relief flickered across David's expression. "I wasn't certain you'd feel similarly. I didn't want to cross boundaries or create discomfort." "You haven't," I assured him. "It's surprising, but not unwanted." We remained there for several moments, the office humming faintly around us, and our conversation settling into comfortable silence. It felt intimate in ways I hadn't experienced in years, sharing space without needing to fill it with conversation, simply feeling understood and acknowledged. When I eventually departed his office that day, it wasn't mere curiosity that accompanied me. It was profound awareness, recognition that something had shifted deeper than surface attraction. I felt genuinely seen, and that realization was simultaneously exhilarating and frightening. Sometimes the moments that reshape everything aren't loud or theatrical. They're small, intentional, and tender, leaving gentle yet undeniable marks upon your heart. That evening, seated at my kitchen table with cooling tea, I reflected on how David had looked at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that life had quietly opened a door I hadn't noticed existed, and for the first time in ages I wanted to step through it, to discover what waited on the other side. The following morning brought a mixture of anticipation and nervousness I hadn't felt in years. It's remarkable how simply seeing someone you trust can make your chest tighten and scatter your thoughts simultaneously. David was already reviewing documents when I arrived, and I hesitated momentarily at the entrance, wondering if I should pretend nothing had changed. But when he looked up, that gentle, understanding gaze meeting mine, all hesitation dissolved. An unspoken agreement passed between us in that look, a mutual acknowledgement that what was developing was real and acceptable. "Morning," he said casually, though warmth colored his tone and reached straight to my heart. "Morning," I echoed, steadying my voice despite feeling my pulse in my throat. The day proceeded in its usual rhythm, yet every interaction carried new significance. A shared look during meetings, hands briefly touching as we passed in corridors, conversations that seemed to extend just slightly longer. It was a careful dance, delicate and precise, yet charged with tension and promise. By late afternoon, the office had quieted again. Most staff had departed, leaving only the soft electronic hum and occasional keyboard clicks. I was completing a report when David appeared at my door, folder in hand. "Do you have time?" he asked, and I noticed the slight hesitation, the way he seemed to weigh each word carefully. "Always," I responded, setting down my pen. He gestured toward the chair near the window, where evening light streamed through, casting everything in golden warmth. "I wanted to discuss something more personal this time," he began, voice low and steady, though edged with vulnerability that made my heart ache. I nodded, not sure what to say, but willing to listen. "I've spent considerable time thinking about us, about this connection we're building, and I want you to know it's not fleeting. It matters deeply to me." Hearing those words shifted something fundamental inside me. Relief, joy, and quiet apprehension about what comes next, mingling together. "It matters to me too," I said softly, honesty clear in my voice. For a long moment, we simply sat together, the room filling with quiet understanding neither of us had experienced before. No rush, no expectations, just presence and recognition of what had quietly grown between us. Then he leaned slightly closer, and the air seemed to hum. "I don't want to complicate anything, but I can't ignore this either," he said, his hand hovering near mine on the desk, hesitant but not withdrawing. I placed my hand over his, a simple gesture carrying more weight than any words could. The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of his grip, grounded me in ways I hadn't realized I needed. "Honesty is all I need," I whispered. "Just this." In that moment, I understood the connection we were building wasn't about impulse or mere attraction. It was about trust, understanding, and the quiet courage to allow ourselves vulnerability. The office, with its ordinary walls and standard lighting, had become a space of discovery where hearts could speak without fear. Leaving that evening, I felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and calm. My steps felt lighter, my thoughts clearer, my heart fuller in ways that transcended professional satisfaction. I knew that whatever came next, I was prepared, because for the first time in years, I felt genuinely seen and genuinely alive. The subsequent days passed in a gentle haze of anticipation and quiet joy. I caught myself smiling more freely, moving with lighter steps, even through routine meetings and reports. Everything felt transformed. The ventilation's hum, sunlight through blinds, even the coffee's aroma seemed richer, infused with new meaning. David and I continued navigating our evolving connection with care, patience, and mutual respect. No rushing, no dramatic pronouncements, just deepening understanding and an unspoken promise that we could explore this without anxiety. Every conversation, every shared glance, every small gesture wove us closer together. I realized intimacy doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it exists in quiet moments, in the subtle recognition of another soul reaching toward yours. One evening, as the building emptied and city lights glowed amber beyond the windows, David invited me into his office once more. The space felt especially warm, bathed in soft lamplight, shadows curling around us like a private sanctuary. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, almost hesitantly, about how this began and how much it's developed. I want you to know I respect you completely, and I want whatever happens next to be mutual, comfortable, and authentic. Emotion tightened my throat, not from fear, but from the profound weight of his sincerity. I want that too, I whispered, my hand naturally finding his. We talked for hours that evening, not about obligations or deliverables, but about ourselves, our hopes, our quiet fears, the paths that had led us to this intersection. It was extraordinary how deeply one honest conversation could transform everything, how words spoken with authenticity could bridge two hearts. As I finally stood to leave, David gently held my hand. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "I want you to know you're seen, truly seen and valued, not just for your contributions, but for who you are." The vulnerability in his voice mirrored my own, and in that shared honesty, I understood something profound. This emotional connection wasn't temporary or circumstantial. It was mutual recognition of worth, quiet intimacy that could sustain itself without requiring drama or spectacle. Walking to my car that night, cool evening air brushing my face, I felt deep clarity and peace. City lights reflected in wet pavement like tiny mirrors of possibility, and I realized life surprises us when we least expect it. Sometimes the most transformative experiences arrive in the quietest moments, whispered between the lines of ordinary days. I smiled, knowing that whatever the future held, I'd discovered something invaluable, a connection built on trust, respect, and genuine care. Driving home, I felt unexpected lightness, a sense that even after years of navigating life's routines and responsibilities, moments still waited to reshape us quietly and beautifully in ways we never imagined. That evening changed everything, not through drama or grand gestures, but by reminding me that true emotional connection, the kind that endures, is born from honesty, vulnerability, and the courage to truly see someone and be seen in return.